On today's episode of the Monkey Mind Lab, we have with us Professor Nadia Horning, a distinguished scholar and educator at Millbury College. As a professor of international and global studies, she brings with her a wealth of knowledge in African politics, environmental governance, and leadership development. Born in Madagascar and educated across 3 continents, Professor Horning holds degrees from George Mason University and a PhD in comparative politics from Cornell University. Her research delves into the politics of deforestation in Africa, particularly Madagascar, Tanzania, and Uganda, as well as the dynamics of African brain flight and brain gain. Beyond her academic pursuits, she has held leadership roles at Middlebury, including directing the African Studies program and social entrepreneurship programs. She is currently the director of the Rohatyn Global Scholars Program and acting director of the Rohatyn Center for Global Affairs. Please join me in welcoming Professor Nadia Horning. Welcome, Professor.
Hello.
So, as I'm sure the big question in everybody's mind is, before we even delve into our question of the day, what is really the difference between international and global?
One easy way, I think, to distinguish the two terms, keeping in mind that they overlap, but they're still distinct. One way to think about the international is to think in terms of state or country or nation state. So international refers to the relationships between two countries or several countries, but the unit of interaction is the state, the country. The global is also about relations, but the relations are more about connectivity beyond the geographic areas. So what is global is something that transcends physical, geographic borders and gets you into a sphere where people can actually communicate and build communities regardless of where they come from or where they live or where they dwell, essentially. So that would be the main difference, I think, between the two. And then, of course, there's much more to say about the two concepts, but another thing you can associate with the global in addition to connectivity is probably flow, because people interact, they share ideas, they trade goods and services, they exchange viewpoints, they show each other that there are different ways of doing and different ways of thinking. So you dress this way, I dress this way, and then, I'm going to take a little bit from your way because it's really cool, or it's less expensive, or it's fashionable, it's whatever it is. So I would say that the global, I think, leads you to think and do in ways that I would say hybridized. You just mesh ways of thinking and ways of doing. So it's a blend, it's a hybrid of what different parts of the world have to offer. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that would be, yeah. But again, they overlap. There is no, it's very difficult because most human beings are organized into nation states. You are born into one. Mm-hmm. It's difficult to extricate yourself from that part of you, which means that it requires international relations to arrive at a possibility, I think, of globalization and supra-territorial connectivity. I don't know if my fancy words are confusing you or if they're helping you, but that's the distinction.
I think that's really helpful. So in other words, one could say that the international is more defined by borders and politics, but the global is something that unites us as human beings on planet Earth.
Beyond borders.
Beyond borders, yeah.
Across and beyond borders.
Across
Or
and beyond
almost
borders.
like regardless of borders.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we can all be like, oh, yellow collar haters from around the world. And we just really, that's our ideology. We hate yellow and we're going to do all kinds of things about it. And the first thing is we're going to communicate the ways in which we hate the yellow collar. That, of course, is a silly example, but it's really that. You could be a fruit hater or you can adhere to a religion, for instance, if you can be, they are Jews, Muslims, Christians, Hindus in different parts of the world. They do form a community or a family, some will say, but they're not confined to, where they dwell. They can communicate and worship across and beyond borders.
Okay. So now time for the $1 million question for the week. Is there a difference between a global education and an international education?
Well, I'll let you guess. If international is different from global, surely there's a difference between international education and global education. And how do we get to it? Maybe by asking you about your experience. You mentioned that I was educated on 3 continents. Mm-hmm. So you can hear already, like there's territorial definition there because you said 3 continents. But there's also something, I must have become something beyond the 3 continents where I was educated. So instead of talking about me, I think it would be interesting to talk about you and ask you about your educational background.
So the RGS scholar in me obviously knows that this answer has a more... Okay, let me rephrase that.
Okay. Yeah. So you are at Middlebury College, first year. Mm-hmm. And I know you come from India because you tell me every time you see me. Like it's not obvious.
Yeah.
So in my mind, I think of you as... Actually, I don't think of you as an international student, but if need be, if I need to, put you in a category, I would say, up here is an international student. Mm-hmm. That means something. It means that, you came from one part of the world, in this case, India, and you are in the United States. Very much international. India, yeah. United States. And absolutely. Receiving an education, as defined in the United States, and then quite possibly having plans to return to India. So you take your American education back to India and you make a life of it, a wonderful life of it. But my guess is that coming to Middlebury is not your first exposure to international relations. So did you experience international relations, for instance, where you were educated? I'm assuming it was in India.
So yes, going back to my educational background, before I became an RGS scholar, I would have probably said, "Oh yeah, there's no difference between a global and international education." I got that, but in hindsight, I can now say that I was very fortunate. Keeping in mind, I was very fortunate to have received a wonderful international education, but my global education only started here at Middlebury. So what does that mean exactly? While I didn't study on 3 different continents, I did study 3 different boards. So I did the ICSE, which is the Indian National Curriculum up till the 8th grade. I did the IGCSE, which is the British curriculum in the 9th and 10th. And then I did the IB, which is the International Baccalaureate program in the 11th and 12th, which is a Swiss program, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, Swiss. So I got a very well-rounded education when it comes to multiple fronts. If you look at it, the ICSE gave me a very strong foundation in English and maths, but the IGCSE gave me a wonderful gave me the wonderful skill of adapting and applying my knowledge, what I learned. But the IB is where it truly came to the international education, where we had a little bit of everything. So it was a little bit of the sciences, a little bit of the maths, a little bit of arts, a little bit of English, a little bit of everything, a foreign language. So that was, I guess, my first exposure to a liberal arts education at the high school level. And because they were international curricula, the content being taught in the textbooks and in the classroom, I suppose, while I wouldn't say is free from bias, is definitely not biased towards a particular nation. That one might say doing history in the Indian curriculum might be very pro-Indian narratives, or whichever government is in power right now, they're very pro them, as compared to studying history from a more international point of view, from a Western point of view.
Thank you. Yes, I think that, I was not in your school. I don't know how you learned. In fact, I'm wondering if you had non-Indian teachers teach you. But I think that is something that I would say, based on what you said, the different, especially with the International Baccalaureate, I will venture to guess that you received a Western education.
Yes.
Which, of course, is international for an Indian student. But just very quickly, I'm wondering about your teachers. Were they mostly Indian, educated elsewhere, or were they non-Indian? Did you have teachers from other parts of the world?
So I would say probably about 99.9% of my teachers were Indians. We had some very lovely teachers in my high school, particularly in the English department, stalwarts of the language. And I would say I got a balance when it came to education. I got a Western education, but deeply rooted in Eastern, or what the West considers to be the Eastern, Indian values.
Yes.
That was something which was very strongly pushed in my high school. It was a Christian Catholic high school. I think it was a Catholic high school. Yes. 160 years old. But of course, in India had a lot of Hindus, but also a lot of Muslims and Christians and Catholics and Parsis, and there was a lot of religious diversity. And there's still some teachers I'm in touch with till date who've really had an impact on me. But coming back to the point of international teachers, I did in the IB for 1 year have a Spanish teacher who was originally from Spain. And the next year following, the next year after she left, I had an Indian teacher for Spanish. And you could definitely tell the difference when it comes to knowing certain intricacies of the language. I guess the difference being between formal communication and informal, the way the textbooks would teach you versus the native speakers, how they would actually converse. And there were certain cultural aspects about the Spanish. There were certain cultural aspects about the Spanish people that I got more of an insight into from that 1 year of having an international teacher. That I would suppose lacks when you have all Indian teachers. Coming back to my time in Middlebury, where I now have exposure to international students from across the globe, faculty from across the globe, programs like RGS that are exposing me to a variety of different things, whether it comes to global issues or thinking in different ways, or even solutioning for that matter. That's where the difference lies, that I had an international education in a very broad sense, that I learned about the world and I learned about different ways of thinking and different perspectives and how to write better and all of that. But my global education really only started here in the US at Middlebury after being immersed in so many cultures, so many languages, so many different kinds of people.
All right, so let me think. So if I understand you correctly, you said that when you were in India, you think you received an international education because your mind was broadened from thinking in the Indian way, if there is such a thing, thinking a certain way, and then having to think about other people's histories or other folks' histories, and maybe something about psychology, maybe something about art, maybe something about whatever, different ways of learning different things. And, it just kind of expanded your mind to think like, oh, there's something greater than India, or there's something outside of India that I can learn from. And that is international. Yes, but then
that, of course, not to say that the Indian curriculum doesn't teach that.
Right.
It does. It has a variety of subjects. But I think the sheer fact that I jumped between 3 different curricula gave me 3 different ways of thinking and perceiving things.
Yes.
Or 3 different ways of approaching the same problem.
Yeah.
And that, according to me, was the international education.
Yeah, it's and you probably. I think you jokingly told me one time that now that you are in the USA or at Middlebury, you're like a staunch defender of Indian food.
Yes.
Which is ironic maybe as far as your schoolmates, high school mates might think, because apparently there you were anything but the defender of Indian food. You were eating Western food all the time. Something like that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So anyway, you seem to have found your identity by yanking yourself out of that environment and saying, oh my goodness, what is the world doing to my food, my beautiful Indian food, and beautiful and delicious. So what's the difference now in Middlebury? Because you said, well, I'm exposed to even more ways of seeing and doing because people come from different parts of the world, and even Americans in RGS, they come from different parts of America, which is not trivial. Not all Americans are the same. Not all parts of America do things the same way. So it's almost like it has exploded what you experienced in India. Does that make it global, though? How does it make it global is the question. And I would say with the international students coming to Middlebury and being put in a room once a week, of course, you're also put in rooms during the week because you have classes, but I'm thinking about RGS. So on Fridays, you know that you're going to be in a room with people from other parts of the world. For instance, what do we have this year? We have Cambodia, we have Iran, we have Lebanon, we have Kenya, we have India, I think. Who else? We have Japan, yes, correct. China. I'm sure I'm forgetting some nationalities, but that's already a vast array, coming from. Oh, we have we have Latin America, we have Europe, we have Africa, and we have what did I say? Asia. So it's now you're really you're during that time it's just like, wow, it's really. I'm expanding basically what I was experiencing in India. And the question is, what's happening to your mind? What's becoming of your worldview? Like, is this exposure changing the way you're looking at the world, or you're looking at your relationship with others, or even the way you think about India back home? Do you think you're a changed person because, your exposure has forced you to almost? And So anyway, the question then is, has this education globalized the way you think about everything, which is different from internationalizing the way you think about everything? And to answer that, you would have to say, how have I learned to think about the world and almost forgetting about those geographic areas, those political territories? And I can't answer that for you. I wonder if you are starting to forget about that level of organization and thinking beyond about global issues, for instance, issues that affect all of us regardless of how much we contribute to them. Either we suffer from them or we benefit from them because, a lot of times people tend to say, well, with globalization, people suffer. It's true, but we also benefit a lot from globalization. Or else you and I wouldn't be able to communicate right now. And by the way, thanks to the American person out there, we'll be able to share with the rest of the world what this exchange is about.
Yeah.
And so, and I think that that's where we're moving beyond the territory. Yes, we are recording on campus in the United States. Yes, you are from India. Yes, I am from Madagascar. But isn't it amazing that the three of us are communicating in one language, which is English, we all have different accents,
Yeah.
but we can still communicate effectively most of the time. And we're communicating without being aware of our national identities or anything. It's just we are exchanging ideas and we're sharing ideas with wherever this podcast is going to end up, which makes it travel, again, transnationally, like supra-territorially, and would expose someone somewhere, maybe in rural, I don't know where, Argentina, to this distinction between international and global, which they may not have really thought about and which might inspire them to engage with the global. You know what I'm saying? So I guess in that way then, I think with this very podcast initiative that you're taking, this is probably the most concrete way I'm watching you actualizing a global education. Mostly because you're sharing it and you're using technology that's going to allow you to spread ideas over very vast territories rather quickly. You turn on your, whatever it is, you turn on your computer, your phone, your whatever, and you can actually listen. So it happens fast. It happens over vast distances. And potentially, you're going to have a huge impact.
And that's also where the global comes in, right?
That's it.
It's a global idea. It doesn't belong to one particular nation, or it's not like this is an American education, so the ideas belong only in the USA.
Exactly. It's almost like it escapes this studio. It escapes this campus. It escapes this country to inform people from other places. Which is extraordinary when you think about it. So
Absolutely.
Anyway, so the global you or the globalized you is the podcast creator and curator, right? And so I guess that, I don't know if that makes sense to you, but that's the best way I can think of explaining, going from an international to education to a global one. By the way, again, it does require some level of internationalization to be able to engage with the global.
So what would you say constitutes that difference between going from a national education to an international one to a global one, especially in the US? Because it's remarkable that at colleges and universities, which are the hubs for
exchange and interrogation
and global discourse,
mm-hmm.
that within this country there exist such institutions, but also most most of my American friends at least, their first exposure to the global or to the international was not in high school, was in college, in fact.
So, of course, potentially that means that, developing a global mindset is the privilege of those who can afford it, or those who are lucky enough to be able to take advantage of a higher education in the United States or, other places as well. In some ways, yes, but again, so you were asking me about national versus international versus global. So I think it's really, I think you answer that question yourself, because when you receive a national education, your worldview is limited to the country where you are learning. And of course, it's super interesting. It's never irrelevant or anything, but it's limiting because, like for instance, if all I knew about was Madagascar, imagine how much I would be missing out. In fact, I cannot even explain anything about, say, Madagascar history without understanding how foreign governments and foreign, businesses and foreign regular people interacted with the island to make its politics, its economy, and its social life, what it has become. So, but anyway, the point though is to say I would be very limited, especially since it's an island. That's really disastrous because you don't even have neighbors to influence you. But then, so, in order for your mind to expand, you're probably better off interacting with the international. So you can do it through the curriculum. So if you're lucky enough to go to a school that offers that, or you just go to another place. In fact, I'm remembering was it in the 70s, I think. So we are definitely during the Cold War. There's this competition between the West and the East blocks, and the East bloc receives this incredible world reputation for STEM education. So it's like the engineers, the doctors, all these guys seem to, be well trained in basically the Soviet states. So at that point, there were programs because, of course, what the East was interested in is developing and expanding its sphere of influence, just like the West was. And so they brought people from different parts of the world to receive an education, usually in a STEM field. And then these people would come back. So they escaped their usual oyster, so to say. They had exposure to a different way of life, and they received, or hopefully a useful education, a useful education. Then they brought that back to their countries and probably, hopefully, made something of themselves and of their countries. So that's very much international. So somebody leaves some, African country, goes to Romania, and comes back and becomes maybe a doctor in that African country. So the same thing with the United States. The United States has Fulbright program to bring foreigners to the United States and also to send Americans to other countries. That is very international because it's from country to country. And in fact, it's facilitated by governments with certain motivations in mind. Okay. That's international, right? I think the situation is very different when you enter that international space, but then exchange with people from different parts of the world. So it's not just those two countries or two or three countries people from different three countries interacting. It's like people from multiple countries and interacting. And then what happens after that is what's interesting. It's like you're not likely to go back to your country of origin. No, it's not automatic anymore. nor are you going to stay where you're receiving an education. Suddenly the world is your oyster because you may have acquired a language skill. So you coming in, you learned English apparently in India, and you also speak Hindi, I'm assuming. And here, I may have heard that you're studying Italian. Well, up here, you might end up in Europe, and that might be the most natural thing for you to have happened, right?
Yeah.
So no USA, no India, and instead maybe Italy, because I think they speak Italian there. So if you speak Italian, you're probably going to end up there. If you were studying Spanish, you would end up...
Which I did study in high school.
Oh, you did? During the 2
French.
years, you did mention that. But anyway, well, of course, there is studying and then there's achieving proficiency and fluency. So those are different. But I do like the fact that your Spanish teacher taught you cultural things, because the language is not just, it's a tool of communication, but it's, when you study a language, you don't just study the language. You actually study that culture that comes with the language. Anyway, that's a note. I'm not the expert on this. I'm just saying language is not just grammar and writing essays. It's really trying to understand how other people think. So it's a great gateway, I think, into globalism, which is why I'm insisting on English. Anyway.
Let's look a bit more at you now. Like I mentioned earlier, you've been educated across 3 different continents. So you've clearly got your international bit in, but also being a professor of political science and having done research into Africa, you certainly have a global perspective on it, and not to mention, of course, being director of the Center of Global Affairs. There's definitely a global aspect to your daily life at Middlebury. How would you say your education has shaped your perspective, and do you think you received an international education or a global one?
I think I received both, and here's how I would say it happened. So, it started in Madagascar. So I'm thinking about the formative years, So it's definitely received like a cultural education, like the foundation in Madagascar. So family, community, Christianity, and all of those happened there. And then I started traveling with my family to Europe. But eventually at age 12, they sent me to boarding school in France. And what happened there is that I really don't know how else to put it, but I received such a French education that I was turned into a French person.
Okay.
But because I had the foundation back home during my formative years, I had become a hybrid because, you couldn't get rid of that. Some people, by the way, reject that. And I certainly had no interest in rejecting who I was at the core. But I did absorb a lot. I mean, you speak like a French person. You recite French poetry. You dress like one. And you just become, in fact, not just French, Parisian. So that was internationalization. But remember, I just said, I had a Malagasy identity and I was turned into a French person. That's very territorial, Madagascar, France. And then I came here, same thing, an education, higher education in the USA, a new cultural experience, trying to figure out Americans. It still hasn't happened, by the way, 40 years on, but, there's still hope. And so, I suppose the transformation happened maybe in academia, where I was now expected to be an academic. And when you are an academic in the USA, you are a certain way. There are expectations as to us. So yet again, I absorbed something which I hadn't been exposed to before. And so then coming out of that whole thing, let's think of it as the travel factory, comes someone who, quite frankly, does not think in terms of national identities anymore. Because when you travel, when you think about what's around you in different places, you really look for commonality, which means that, we are so much alike. I see how we're different. I see how we speak different languages. I see how we do things differently. I see how we eat different foods. And yes, all of that. But you have an opportunity to actually think, I see how we are the same, how we share the same problems or opportunities at different stages of our lives. And I think that's when the global happens, when you start building off of different international experiences and just start thinking beyond you start thinking beyond those particular territories. I don't know how to explain it, but you just think about, how does one, I don't know, get a job? How does one face when becoming a mother for the first time? How does one deal with being a teacher when the students are changing from one decade to another? Or actually, no, it's like every year they seem to change every year. Like, it's amazing how, someone who's 19 will say, "Oh, I feel so old," which of course makes you wonder how you should feel, if they feel old. But the world is changing so quickly that you become old and obsolete. You have to keep up more than ever. And I think that's another aspect of globalization. You have no choice but to keep up, no choice but to observe the changes, and try to adapt to these changes. When you stay in your place, or when you're territorially confined and culturally confined and all of that, yes, of course, there's some adaptation going on, but I think you catch on with the idea later than someone who's globally minded. Someone who's globally minded will see the patterns, I think, faster than someone who is not used to thinking beyond the territorial or the cultural. Oh my goodness. I have no idea if I'm making sense to you.
No, you are. Don't worry.
Because my monkey is a little agitated too. It's tired too, but it won't take a break.
Yeah. Perhaps the last question, and to state perhaps stating the obvious here, what do you think is the benefits of receiving a global education, and what are some ways in which one can try globalizing one's mindset in little day-to-day things? Or how can teachers in high schools start bringing in, if not the international foundations for a global education, small elements of a global education from the high school level, not just in America or India or Madagascar, but across the world, so that, and this is my personal opinion on the matter, you have a more intelligent breed of human beings who can see beyond the end of their own nose and understand and value different perspectives, and who knows, maybe change the world for the better.
So your question is about what can educators do to offer their students a global mindset. I would say, again, I will go back to what I said earlier, look for commonality. So say, for instance, there is a student riot somewhere in Zimbabwe. And so a teacher in Zimbabwe would utilize technology, and I would say in this case it's the internet, to show to their students that they're not alone in, for instance, whatever it is that the riot is about or against. and to help, maybe to help them learn how that particular conflict was resolved, because you don't want to spend your youth rioting. It's not fun. It's very destructive, so you want to get to a place of construction. And so by showing them that you're not alone, there's something very empathetic about that. And you open their minds, you open their eyes, you say, look, the Japanese, whoever, whatever may have happened in Japan at a particular point, these students were in the same situation that you are in. And right there, you've expanded their minds. So the problem of protesting against an issue is no longer confined to that particular situation in that particular place on that territory. It's really just like, it's a principle. It's a method of addressing some kind of grievance, frustration, or whatever. Oops. So I would say bring the outside, especially now that it's possible. I know it's not possible for all schools. There is school and there is school. I'm aware of that. But where you can, where you have the privilege to leverage what is on the internet, bring it to your classroom. You don't have to travel to that place to have observed a riot in Japan. And you can also, you don't have to tell students to read about it, for 50 pages. If they can, with the 50 pages, see what it looked like in Japan and how they resolved potentially the conflict, or if they didn't resolve, what are the consequences, what's coming. So again, my point is just to say, I think that, if you utilize teaching materials in ways that are going to encourage your students to think about the universality of the human condition, that you've done your job globalizing their mindsets. Yeah.
So basically to look beyond your identity, or my identity is an Indian, yours is a French Madagascar citizen, Malagasy citizen, or as an American citizen, or anywhere in the world, and to look at things as human beings.
Exactly. That's the bottom line. And think about fellow human beings. That's really the idea. Instead of saying, the Japanese do this, the Indians do that. Yes, of course they do all of that. But, beyond that, what is it that we're talking about here? And, we're talking about an effort to, make progress, or to survive, or to rise above challenges and all of that. So yeah, I would say that's really to the point of really forgetting where you are and where the others are. So we're all like converging into this space of connectivity, social connectivity, that allows us to think, we're young people concerned about global issues, the future of our planet, versus, I'm really concerned about where India is going.
Yeah. Or the fact that, India is impacted by global warming.
Exactly.
Or my city's temperature is now 40 degrees Celsius in
you
the
got
summer.
It.
To look beyond that, and I realize for some it might sound trivial that but we're already thinking like this, but I guess they need to realize the privilege that they have of the fact that they don't have to think about it, that they've already received that international/global education or mindset enough that it's not something that they have to think of inherently, as compared to somebody who needs further exposure to get to that point.
Yes.
And realize that the world is bigger than just one person or a group of people.
Exactly. Imagine the empathy that would come out of that. Imagine how we can rise above suspicion, mistrust, divisions. Imagine how unifying that would be. Even though, yes, we are different. We know that. Like I said, we don't speak English the same way. But that becomes, it's only a medium from communicating. We are interested in communicating. I am not trying to convince you to speak English like I do. Well, let alone convince you to speak Malagasy. It's like, no, like you're not trying to convince me to learn to speak Hindi. Yeah. It's we utilize our common language to connect and hopefully make the world a better place.
And kind of live that human experience.
Exactly, on a very equal, on equal terms, in a collaborative way, partnership, not trying to make you into me, and on the basis that I am better, superior, more enlightened than you or anything like that. No, it's really because we have to bring everything that makes us different and unique into thinking about making a situation better than we found it, for instance. So make the world better than we found it is, that's how I think of it. That's the value of a global education and a global mindset, ideally.
To leave the world a little bit better than when you found it.
Yes, by working with others.
Yeah.
Collaborating, being curious.
And I suppose that's the difference between the international. The international would be to leave your country or its allies better than when you founded it. And I guess you could say that's patriotism and nationalism to a certain extent. But the globals what connects all human beings. Different from the universal.
Different from the universal, because with the universal there's this norm emerges somewhere and we should all adopt it. Sometimes it's a good thing, but there's still some imposition there. It's almost lazy. Like, I know better, so therefore you need to learn what I know.
With the universal?
Yeah. If I say, I don't know, what are some universal norms that we live by now up here? I don't know, freedom, equality.
The UN's human rights.
Yes, exactly. Good. Yeah. The Declaration. Yeah. UN Declaration of Human Rights. The thing is, we have to realize that maybe in some particular circumstances, it's an imposition. And because it's an imposition, it might, your norm might not be seen as legitimate and it won't be absorbed. So if nothing else, it will be ineffectual. But sometimes it's actually damaging too, just to make people, make people abide by norms that they never came up with. So I would say universalization, that's again, some good and then some things to really reconsider. Sometimes universalization is a simple way of imposing, of dominating. Again, my way is the way. Yeah. Don't know. That lacks humility. That lacks curiosity. And I think that it's a step, it's a barrier to, again, making things better on the basis of equal partnerships. Am I making sense to you?
Oh, of course. Yes.
Yeah.
So I think we need one grand, spectacular statement from you for the ending, something that will really hit the audiences hard. A Spider-Man sort of thing, like with great power comes great responsibility.
I really don't have one, but I will just say, always look for what unites us rather than what divides us. Always look for what equalizes us than organizes us into hierarchies. Yeah, that would be. And the global, if you do it right, will get you there at a global scale.
There you go.
There you go.
So that was Professor Nadia Horning on this week's episode of the Monkey Mind Lab, where we looked at the question, Is there truly a difference between an international education and a global education? Thank you so much for joining us, Professor Horning.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.